morning, good evening, and good afternoon to you all. From those down the road to the folks around the world. Welcome back to a foodie kind of video. Over the last few weeks, I've been looking for some of Australia's oldest recipes, and indeed Australian recipe books, in order to figure out if some of the national dishes of today have origins in the 1800s. In today's sweet video, I'll be going through 3 recipes from the late 19th and early 20th century. The first is Melbourne Pancakes, courtesy of the very famous Mrs. Beeton's book, the 1907 edition, which had an entire chapter dedicated to Australian cuisine. The second is from Edward Abbot's 1864 publication, the English and Australian Cookery Book, where I will be trying to create a Victoria cake, which is like a bit of a lemon cake. And from an article dated 1911, I'll be trying to recreate an ANZAC cookie. Not the same ANZAC biscuit dedicated to the First World War veterans, a rolled oats kind of biscuit, but no, this one was more of a ginger nut kind of biscuit, a gingery biscuit that I'll be recreating. So, without further ado, let's enjoy some old yet good food. The first stop in our Australian sweet culinary journey is a set of Melbourne pancakes from Mrs. Beeton's book on household management. To start, Mrs. Beeton's book asked me to mix together 2 cups of flour, 2 cups of sour milk, 2 eggs, and half a teaspoon of salt to create a smooth batter. The recipe then asked for the batter to stand for an hour and a half, something which, curiously, I have never come across when making regular pancakes on any given day or Shrove Tuesday. But I'm not exactly going to argue with the recipe, so left it I did. It then asked me to add the 2 ounces of melted butter and a good teaspoon's worth of carbonate of soda, which had been dissolved in a little bit of water and both added into the batter mixture. When creating the first Melbourne pancake, I rather put too much butter in to fry it with and over-ladled the amount of mixture needed to create said pancakes. I was half expecting a thick version of a pancake like you would find across in America, instead of the very thin sort of crepe style pancakes that are more used to in the UK and Europe. Thankfully, as with pancakes, the first one always turns out a little bit rubbish, and the subsequent ones that we've made, which we had enough batter for about 7 or 8 possibly, turned out much better. The final ingredient of these Melbourne pancakes was a bunch of sweetened and mashed soft fruits. However, neither myself nor my sous chef couldn't be bothered to do the process of mashing and sweetening our raspberries that we bought. So we decided just to layer them whole in between each pancake layer, and added a little bit of sugar on the top, just for good measure. Overall, these pancakes were a rousing success, and so we happily enjoyed the 7 or 8 layers of pancakes with fresh raspberries, a little bit of sugar, and saluted a job well done. The second sweet recipe that we have for this video is what was known as a Victoria cake. Now, we're all familiar with a Victoria sponge cake, which is obviously 2 sponge layers and a middle with jam. But this Victoria cake was, well, rather different, in so much as it was more of a lemon cake than anything else. This recipe from Edward Abbott's English and Australian cookery book was rather short amongst the rest of the recipes on that page. It was an all-in-one kind of recipe, asking for 12 egg yolks, 6 egg whites, a pound of sugar, the juice of 2 lemons, and the zest of 1, mixed together for half an hour. And it was very specific on the half an hour mark. We then added the 12 ounces of flour as agreed in the recipe. The mixture was then transferred into 2 loaf tins, the only sort of baking tins that we had available at that moment, which we lined with greaseproof paper. This wasn't necessarily something that was discussed within Edward Abbott's recipe, but it seemed a logical thing to do at the time. The recipe does, however, ask us to bake the cake for 1 single hour. And we decided that a temperature of about 180 to 200 degrees was probably a good sign, considering the numerous other cake recipes out there asking for a similar temperature. Once extracted out of the oven, we considered this recipe to be quite a rousing success. Me and my sous chef taste tested it and came to the conclusion that this was kind of like a dry version of a lemon drizzle cake. Perhaps dry in so much as maybe our temperature was a little bit too high. But despite this, we still considered it to be quite a pleasurable eat. The third and final recipe of this video is that of an ANZAC cookie from a newspaper article dated in 1916. In fact, it was a food recipe competition that won 4th place, a recipe by Mrs. Sutherland Grosvenor. The ANZAC biscuit, as we come to know it in the 21st century, is majoritively made up with rolled oats. But this ANZAC cookie from the previous 20th century has a lot of ginger in it and no oats at all. Now, ANZAC is an acronym for the Australian New Zealand Army Corps, the name synonymous with those armed forces fighting from those nations during the First World War. Now, the origins of the ANZAC biscuit as we know it have various origins, but this recipe, which I have used from 1916, is one of the first publicated sort of versions of a biscuit, or in this case cookie, with the name ANZAC in front of it. Another all-in-one recipe, sort of. The recipe from Mrs. Sutherland Grosvenor asked me to combine 1 cup of treacle with 1/4 cups of milk, sugar, and melted butter. All of these ingredients should then be placed into a pan and made hot. The result was that all of these ingredients turned into a sort of loose consistency, looser than the very thick treacle that had been placed in the pan. 1 dessert spoonful of ginger and a teaspoon of baking soda were then added to this loose consistency mixture, which, upon reflection and the result of these ANZAC cookie, it was probably not enough for a sort of gingery type biscuit that we were expecting. The final and most confusing instruction of this recipe was adding enough flour to make a stiff dough that could be easily rolled and cut into a round. Now, we didn't measure the amount of flour that we used, we just sort of spoonfuled the flour into the mixture until such time as it got stiff and was able to be rolled. At one point I was quite concerned that we would never get to that point and that we would run out of flour. That's how much flour we ended up using. But we got there in the end after a very slow process of mixing flour and the other ingredients together. We split this rather sizable amount of dough into 2 batches. 1 because we didn't have enough room in the oven, and 2 because we didn't have enough trays to do all of the batches at once. Baking in a moderate oven is rather a vague instruction to be finally left with. To my foolish mind, I thought that 200 degrees for half an hour was a reasonable amount of time for these ANZAC cookies. But as you can see in these images here, we were left with a very hard and somewhat burnt version of this cookie. Rather pleasant, don't get me wrong, but you had to grind your teeth to get into this cookie. It was then suggested to me that we should lower the temperature to 180 and only cook for about 15 minutes this time. The result was, well, a much better success than the first batch, and I'm rather glad that we had 2 batches instead of just the 1. Though this second batch can't be said to be a much greater improvement, because the cookies didn't really rise and, well, they were somewhat soft, but cooking them any further would risk going back to the results of our first batch. The ANZAC cookies were pleasant nonetheless, but there was definitely room for improvement in this particular recipe and this attempt at cooking these ANZAC cookies. And that unfortunately is about it for this sweet treat video. I hope you've liked what you've seen. I certainly enjoyed recreating these 100-year-old plus recipes from a time gone by, and it was fun also to interpret the instructions to a more modern day setting of the 21st century. As I say, I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen, and I hope to see you in the next video where it will be something a little bit more savoury. Enjoy! Is that one of those food channel things?
Why are you taking video of a small spoon with salt on it?